Dan Shulman, the voice of Sunday Night Baseball, alongside ESPN MLB analyst Chris Singleton. The coverage begins at 6 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. Phil's 5-1, swept the Braves in the opening series. They travel to Atlanta tonight to kick that thing off, the Sunday night game, right here on 97.3 ESPN. Dan Shulman will call it. He joins me now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. A little early season Phillies Braves. And Dan, I'll tell you, this is a lot different Phillies team than the one that we saw the last couple of years. And one of the key reasons is that bullpen seems to be a actual major league bullpen. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing a lot better than Joe Girardi did last year whenever he had to signal to the bullpen. One of my other jobs is doing Blue Jays games. So I saw a couple of games that were great for the Blue Jays, not so much for the Phillies. There was a doubleheader you might remember in August of last year, and that bullpen was historically bad. I think the group ERA was over 7 or something like that. So, it's really early, 6 games in, but they've been really good in 5 of them. And, the acquisition of Bradley and Alvarado, Coonrod, they've got some better arms this year. You just can't win these days without a good bullpen because it's not like starters are throwing complete games. You got to get guys at the end of games to get you some outs.
Yeah, there's no question that, a lot of people would say, look, if their bullpen was just halfway better, they had a 7 ERA. If they were just in the mid-3s, upper 3s, maybe 4s last year, they probably are a playoff team. So, Dan, when you look at this Phillies team in your prep for this Sunday night matchup, do you say, look, this lineup's the same as last year for the most part. They added Bohm for the whole year now, so that should even be a little bit of a boost. The starting rotation's solid. If the bullpen's just better, are you looking at a playoff team?
I think potentially. I think the National League East is a fascinating division. Atlanta's obviously not gotten off to a good start, but you got to respect the talent that they've got and what they've done the last few years, and I think they're going to make some noise. The Mets made some obvious upgrades in the offseason, so they're going to make some noise. And I wouldn't count Washington out. They're a lot different than they were in some respects than they were a couple of years ago when they won the World Series. But I think the Phillies are in the conversation for sure. But, one thing we all have to remember, and I know you do, is that 8 teams made the playoffs last year. Only 5 will make the playoffs this year. So it's going to be hard. If San Diego is good enough to be a solid wild card team behind the Dodgers, and, whoever wins the Central, that means 2 teams at most are coming out of the East. So are the Phillies good enough to finish in the top 2 in the National League East? Possibly, yeah, but I don't think it's a lock. The bullpen's got to be good. And I'm still curious about the rotation. Love Nola, love Wheeler. And if this is Eflin, then it's a great top 3. Still wondering a little bit about the 4-5 in the rotation with Chase Anderson and Matt Moore, and whether those will be the guys to take them through the whole season. Saw a lot of Chase Anderson last year with Toronto, obviously. So there are still some question marks, but there are question marks on just about every team unless you're the Dodgers.
Oh, yeah, it's early, but obviously the big difference for the Phils is this bullpen, and obviously they're not scoring a whole heck of a lot, just 4 runs per game. They've had a lot of close games. The first series against Atlanta, they were all tightly contested, 3-2, 2-1, 4-0. So this should be a pretty interesting series, but I guess – the Phillies swept the Braves a couple of years ago. The Braves went on to win the division. This Braves team, a lot of people think, other than the Dodgers, this might be the next best team in the National League.
Yeah, I think it's possible. And again, they're off to a slow start. And they got some bad news about Mike Soroka that he's not going to be back anytime soon. But I think, again, they've got too much talent to not be better than they've shown. When you've got Freeman and you've got Ozuna, and you've got Acuna, and you've got Albies, you've got some real star power, some firepower, and they're going to hit better than they have. Freddie Freeman's going to hit better. Albies is going to hit better. Ozuna's going to hit better. It's an incredibly small sample size. If you forced me right now, pick who's going to win the National League East, I think I would still pick Atlanta. But it's great for how about the start to the Phillies schedule? Atlanta, the Mets, Atlanta, the Mets. Right, the first 2 weeks is nothing but that in the National League East. So if you want to get like a good barometer on how good your team is against the teams you're going to be competing with all season, the Phillies are certainly getting that.
Yeah, Dan Shulman will call Sunday Night Baseball. It'll be the Phillies and the Braves. This pitching matchup this series, it's Wheeler Morton tonight, Eflin Anderson tomorrow, and Matt Moore and Drew Smiley. Yes, that former Philly Drew Smiley who had a cup of coffee here. That is the pitching matchup on Sunday night. Now, you mentioned doing the Blue Jays games. Are you in Dunedin with them right now?
I am not. So we have a complicated situation because of the border. We have three announcers, myself, Buck Martinez, Pat Tabler, and any two of us will be on the game at any time. Buck lives in Florida. Tabby lives in Ohio. I live in Toronto. Nobody's crossing borders right now. So Buck and Tabby are doing the games, the Dunedin games, from the ballpark. And then the road games, I'm doing it from a studio in Toronto, and Buck and Tabby both have a setup in their house, and one of them joins me, either or, is with me for the road games. So it's listen, I'm thrilled to be working, and they're, it could be going a lot of different ways. But the Blue Jays, this lovable little team that I've been, following and calling for most of my life, because of the border situation, the team has some issues, and we've got some issues.
Right.
So to answer your question, no, I'm not in Dunedin. I'm as of now, I'm doing all the road games. If they get back to Toronto later in the year, the whole thing could flip, and maybe I do the home games. Maybe the border's open by then. But, as you can imagine, we're kind of on like a month-to-month basis. Right?
Wow. So that's interesting because I knew someone that was at the game in Dunedin last night because obviously Mike Trout is from our area, so a lot of people like to travel and watch him play. I said it's got to be pretty neat. Now, you're not there, but to see Mike Trout play a regular season game in that little ballpark where you're parking on some lady's yard and paying her $2 to go park.
Right. Well, he hit a ball, I think, into the yard of the elementary school across the street over the left field fence last night. That doesn't happen in Citizens Bank. That doesn't happen at Rogers Center or anything like that. And not only is it a spring training town, like Dunedin is a small, sleepy, quaint spring training town. Like, we're not talking. It's different than Clearwater. It's different than Sarasota. The Blue Jays have been there since 1977, and they've done everything they can to upgrade the ballpark this year, just like they did in Buffalo last year, their AAA ballpark, where they're likely going to wind up, I think, again, middle of the season. They're not going to stay in Dunedin all year. It gets too hot. It rains too much. So I think they'll be out of Florida by June. They're hoping to come right to Toronto, but I wouldn't bet on it. So I think they're going to wind up in Buffalo, and then they could wind up in Toronto. Who knows, August, September. They might have 3 different homes this year.
Wow, yeah. It's funny. It's like you're sitting at the Dunedin Smokehouse over there, and here comes a Mike Trout baseball bouncing down the street. It's a pretty unique situation down there. That American League East, though, speaking of Toronto, you've got, you said this cute little team. That's not a cute little team. This team's pretty darn good.
They are pretty darn good, and they're not off to a great start, but I was just being tongue-in-cheek about it. But yeah, they can really score runs. The Phillies saw that last year, played them 6 games, I think, last year. And they can really score runs, and then they go out and they add Springer and Simeon. Now, Springer hasn't played yet. Had an oblique injury and now has a quad situation, and he's out at least another week. And a lot of guys who hit really well last year, like Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, Kevin Biggio, they're not hitting yet. But again, 7 games. It's an incredibly small sample size. So the issue for them is going to be pitching. They've got an ace in Hyunjin Ryu, who's just terrific. But after that, it's a lot of kind of guys trying to get back to where they were. Projects, I guess, if you will. And they've got some injuries. Nate Pearson and Thomas Hatch, Robbie Ray is out right now. Tanner Roark had an awful first start. I'm not sure how long they're going to stay with him. He had an awful year last year. Bullpen is good. Bullpen is deep and a lot of big velocity guys. But for them, I think it's going to be the starting pitching that determines whether or not they're a playoff team.
Now, you just mentioned Dan Shulman's our guest from Sunday Night Baseball. You just mentioned velocity and that. Is that something you've been calling games for a long time? Is that something that has changed the most maybe from the game is the fact that every guy is throwing – it used to be if you're like 94, 95, that guy throws hard. Now these guys, Alvarado comes in the other night, and he's 101. It's almost every if you're not 95 and up, you're out.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, the Blue Jay bullpen was full of 88 to 92, and it just didn't work. And
Dan, the Phillies bullpen has been 88 to 92 my whole life.
I first started calling games in 1995, and back then, when you said a guy threw 90, you meant that as a compliment. Now it's like an insult. Now it's on the other side, especially if you're coming out of the bullpen. The Blue Jays have a lefty, Ryan Barucki, who as a starter was throwing 91. Now as a reliever, he's throwing 97. And he's embraced the change to the bullpen because he realizes he's got a better chance probably of being successful in this role. It's analytics has changed a dozen different things, at least in baseball. But one of them is everybody understands that velocity plays, that the way to win ball games is to strike people out, is to get swings and misses. Hitters are too good. They're too strong. They get the ball in the air too much. You got to minimize contact as much as you can. And for most guys, unless you're a Kyle Hendricks or a Hyunjin Ryu or somebody like that, the best way to minimize contact is to throw as hard as you can. Unfortunately, and this is just my opinion, I think throwing as hard as you can is one of the reasons why guys are getting hurt so much. I'm getting up there in years right now, but I remember 4-man rotations and guys throwing 270 innings back in the 80s. Like that happened. And I don't think everybody was a max effort guy all the time. They were pitching to contact. Guys were hitting the ball on the ground. They were getting ground outs. They were throwing complete games with 106 pitches. Like, that doesn't happen. Lance Lynn threw a shutout yesterday, and it was almost like a national holiday, like everybody talked about it so much. So, the game is totally different than it used to be. But yeah, velocity is certainly one of the biggest differences that we've seen.
It really is, and we talk a lot. It's funny because I coach baseball and I pitch, and people are like, "Well, how hard did you throw?" And 10 years ago, I'd say, I used to hit 89 on the gun, and people are like, "That's pretty good," And now I'd be like, "That's all you threw was 89 miles an hour." It's like, man. But the velocity is so different. But the game itself, the launch angle and the exit velocity, I mean, how much do you kind of buy into all that and how it has impacted where this game is today?
Well, it's impacted the game tremendously. I mean, it's a very different sport than it was 15, 20, 25 years ago. Again, going back to the 80s, 70s, I remember teams like the St. Louis Cardinals and the Kansas City Royals totally built on speed, defense, and pitching. Totally built on speed, defense, and pitching. And now, power plays, and power is the way to win. And I understand, it's very smart people crunching numbers and coming up with, hey, this is the best way to win ball games. I don't think it's as aesthetically pleasing a game. I like speed and defense and athleticism and things like that, and I'd like to see the ball in play a little bit more. And I don't think I'm yelling at clouds or get off my lawn or anything like that. And I think it's going to swing back a little bit in that direction. But it is a very different game. You go back and look at guys like Tom Seaver and Jim Palmer, like Hall of Fame guys, and their strikeout rates were like 6 per 9, 7 per 9. Now a number 4 starter, a sub 500 guy striking out a batter an inning. It's just a totally different sport. Guys are not afraid to strike out. There's no shame in striking out as a hitter. I mean, you swing hard, even at 2 strikes. Like when I was in the 80s, when I was a teenager, every single number 2 hitter in the game, every single number 2 hitter was a little guy, a middle infielder who would hit the ball to the right side or bunch over. Every single guy. Now your number 2 hitter often is your best hitter on the team because that's what the analytics have said, right? And I'm not knocking analytics at all. Like, being smarter is a good thing. And teams are trying to find a way to be smarter and exploit advantages that they may have and to win different ways. The opener's another example of it. Right? Like Tampa Bay doing it like crazy 2-3 years ago, and other teams have done it since. The Blue Jays are doing it in their game tonight. So it's really manifested itself in many, many ways. And some stick and some don't. But with the amount of information that's out there these days, it's easy for people to say, in most cases, hey, this works and this doesn't. Sometimes I think there's some gray area and some subtlety and some nuance that's lost. It's this isn't blackjack. You can't say, hit on 16, hold on 17. It doesn't work like that 100% of the time. It might work most of the time, but it doesn't work like that all the time.
Dan Shulman will call Sunday Night Baseball with Chris Singleton, 6 o'clock Sunday night right here on 97.3 ESPN. It's the Phillies and the Braves. By the way, every 2-hitter is Placido Polanco. That's who a 2-hitter is.
That's right.
He's the only one that ever was created to be the 2-hitter. Dan, appreciate you chiming in, man, and catching up, and we'll be listening on Sunday Night Baseball.
All right, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Dan Shulman, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Sunday Night Baseball here on 97.3 ESPN. It's the Phillies and the Braves. And Dan and Chris will have the call on 97.3 ESPN.